Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something really quite significant. It's this idea of how our early experiences shape us, maybe in ways we don't always fully grasp.
That's right.
We're going to explore that potential gap,
Yeah,
between how we might understand things intellectually as adults and where we are emotionally, especially for those who grew up with narcissistic parents.
exactly. And our sort of mission here today is to try and understand why some viewpoints suggest that many people with this kind of background might identify with an emotional age that's, well, often pegged around 5 to 7 years old.
Okay, 5 to 7. So let's set the stage. What's typically happening for a child around that age, developmentally speaking, in a, let's say, healthier environment? What are the big milestones?
Well, between 5 and 7, kids are really starting to build a stronger sense of self. They're moving past that purely egocentric view, where everything revolves around them. They
Right.
begin to see themselves as separate individuals with their own thoughts, their own feelings, separate from their parents or caregivers.
So that I'm me, you're you kind of realization really starts clicking in. What else is key emotionally at that stage?
Emotional regulation is a huge one. They're obviously still learning, they need help, but they should be able to identify their feelings a bit more clearly, maybe express them, and develop some early skills to manage those big emotions, building frustration tolerance too.
Okay. And socially, how are things changing?
Socially, they're getting much more involved with peers, learning about cooperation, how to share, navigating those little social bumps. This is really fundamental for developing empathy, understanding that, oh, other people have feelings and viewpoints different from mine.
Sounds like a critical foundation for, well, everything later on.
Hmm.
Relating to yourself and others. What's the parent or caregiver's role in all this? How do they support it?
Oh, it's crucial. Consistent mirroring and validation are key. So when a child expresses something, joy, sadness, anger, the caregiver reflects it back accurately. You seem really sad about that, or wow, you're so excited.
So the child feels seen, understood.
Exactly. It validates their inner world, teaches them their feelings are real and acceptable.
That sense of being understood
Yeah,
feels vital. And this is ideally happening with the backdrop of, well, love and acceptance.
ideally, yes. Unconditional or mostly unconditional love. The child starts building this core belief that they're loved for who they are, not just for, performing well or being good. That creates a stable sense of self-worth.
Right. Okay, now let's pivot. What happens when the primary caregiver has narcissistic traits, when that's the environment? How does that clash with these milestones we've just talked about?
The clash can be pretty dramatic. Often, in those dynamics, the child's needs, they take a backseat, completely secondary to the parent's needs. We often see emotional neglect. The child's feelings get dismissed, ignored, maybe even ridiculed,
So the message is your feelings don't matter or they're wrong.
pretty much. Or they're inconvenient for me. So the child learns, often very quickly, to just suppress those feelings, keep them hidden to avoid, a negative reaction.
Wow. That must really interfere with understanding your own emotions and that mirroring the validation you mentioned.
Often it's just not there, or it's distorted. Instead of seeing their true self reflected, the child might be seen only as an extension of the parent, like a source of narcissistic supply someone to make the parent feel good or look good.
Or the opposite, right? The scapegoat.
Or the scapegoat, exactly. Their actual identity, their genuine feelings, they just aren't seen accurately. So forming a solid sense of this is who I am becomes incredibly difficult.
And the love and acceptance isn't that steady foundation then.
No, it often becomes very conditional. It depends on meeting the parent's needs, expectations, making them happy. So the child learns their worth is tied to what they do for the parent, not who they intrinsically are. That just eats away at developing secure self-worth.
And ableism boundaries, that sense of personal space, what's okay.
Often violated, yeah. Narcissistic parents might overshare adult problems, demand the child be their confidant, intrude on their privacy. There's little respect for the child's developing autonomy, so the child doesn't learn what healthy boundaries even look like, let alone how to set them.
And the overall feeling in the home, I imagine it could be quite
Yeah.
unsteady.
Inconsistency, unpredictability in moods and reactions. It's common. The child never knows what to expect. It creates this constant low-level or sometimes high-level anxiety, always walking on eggshells, trying to manage the parent's emotional state. Healthy development is tough in that kind of environment.
So when we talk about this idea of an emotional age maybe being stuck around 5 to 7 for adult children of narcissistic parents, it really seems to map directly onto that period where these core needs, finding yourself, learning emotions, feeling secure, We're fundamentally unmet. It's like development stalled out in that specific area.
That's a really good way to put it. Because those years, 5 to 7, are so critical for individuation, becoming your own person, and figuring out the social world. But the narcissistic family dynamics actively block that. Plus, you're still so dependent at that age, right? And if the safety and security you depend on is shaky or conditional, it disrupts attachment, makes you super sensitive to perceived threats in relationships later on.
And we should be clear, this isn't like someone is literally acting like a 5-year-old all the time.
Oh, absolutely not. It's not literal regression across the board. The idea of the emotional age is more a metaphor for those unmet developmental pieces. Intellectually, they can be incredibly capable, successful, function perfectly well in many adult roles.
But underneath.
Underneath the emotional operating system, let's say the core beliefs, the automatic reactions might still be running on that software developed by that vulnerable child whose needs weren't met.
Okay, let's dig into that disconnect more. How does someone appear so competent, so functional, while still carrying that emotional immaturity from childhood?
Well, you develop coping mechanisms, right? Survival strategies. You learn to adapt. Maybe you become hyper-attuned to others' needs, a real people pleaser, trying to earn that approval or just avoid conflict.
Trying to manage the environment.
Exactly. Or maybe you go the other way, become highly perfectionistic, driven by achievement, seeking that external validation because the internal sense of worth wasn't fostered. These strategies can make someone look very high functioning.
But the core emotional wounds are still there, driving things behind the scenes. Let's use an example. What about relationships and that fear of abandonment?
Okay, yeah. So intellectually, the adult child might know what a healthy relationship should look like. They might value trust, communication, seek out partners who seem reliable.
They know the theory.
They know the theory. But that early experience, maybe with inconsistent love or feeling like they could be rejected at any moment if they didn't meet the parents' needs, that creates a different emotional reality.
How does that play out?
Well, their emotional core, it's still operating from that place of deep fear. Fear of being left, fear of rejection. So even in what seems like a secure relationship, something small like, say, a partner takes a bit longer to text back than usual can trigger this huge wave of anxiety and intense panic almost.
And what kind of thoughts might pop up?
Oh, things like, they're mad at me, they're pulling away, I knew this was too good to be true, what did I do wrong? The reaction is often way out of proportion to the actual event because it's plugging right back into that childhood insecurity. And sadly, that anxiety can sometimes lead to behaviors that push the partner away, kind of fulfilling the fear.
It's like that old wound just gets activated. Okay, what about setting boundaries, that fear of disapproval you mentioned?
Well, that's a big one. Intellectually, again, they might totally understand, yes, boundaries are healthy, I need them for my well-being, I have a right to say no.
But actually doing it.
Actually doing it can feel terrifying, like genuinely terrifying, because emotionally, they're still hooked into that childhood fear of the parent's anger, disapproval, maybe withdrawal of affection, which felt like survival back then.
So saying no feels dangerous.
It can feel fundamentally dangerous. It triggers massive guilt, anxiety, this feeling of I'm being selfish or they're going to hate me. So even though they know they should set a boundary, the emotional cost feels too high. That people-pleasing becomes almost automatic, a learned survival skill.
That pattern of putting the parents' needs first just gets wired in. Okay, third example, handling criticism.
Right. So intellectually, you might understand, okay, this person's giving me feedback. Maybe it's helpful. Maybe I can learn something.
Constructive criticism exists.
Exactly. But emotionally, even mild, well-intentioned criticism can unleash this flood of shame, intense feelings of being fundamentally flawed, worthless. It hits that raw nerve from childhood where maybe criticism was constant or where there was just a real lack of positive affirmation.
So it's not just about the words being said now.
No, it taps right into that core belief, I'm not good enough. The intellectual understanding gets completely swamped by this waves of old pain, and the reaction might be, getting really defensive, shutting down completely, or turning inward with brutal self-criticism.
That sounds exhausting, honestly, constantly battling those internal reactions. Let's flip it. What about experiencing success? Celebrating achievements? Feeling genuine self-worth?
Yeah, that can be surprisingly difficult too.
Yeah.
Intellectually, they might know, okay, I worked hard for this promotion or I accomplished this goal. They can see the achievement on paper.
But feeling it, truly feeling proud or worthy.
That's often the tricky part. That emotional core, if it was consistently devalued or ignored in childhood, if achievements weren't really seen or celebrated genuinely, it struggles to really internalize success, to feel that sense of authentic pride and self-worth.
Is this where imposter syndrome comes in?
Very often, yes. That nagging feeling of I'm a fraud, I just got lucky, they're going to find out I don't really know what I'm doing. It stems from that lack of consistent, genuine validation early on. It leaves this kind of internal void that external achievements alone can't easily fill.
So they might downplay things or find it hard to take a compliment.
Exactly. Downplay achievements, attribute them to luck or other people, feel really awkward accepting praise. It all reflects that struggle to feel truly worthy deep down.
Wow. It really paints a picture of this deep internal conflict. So given all this, how does healing start? How do you begin to bridge that gap between the intellectual adult and that wounded emotional part?
Well, a huge part of healing is actually making that connection, connecting the intellectual understanding with the emotional experience.
Yeah.
It means you kind of have to acknowledge and process those past experiences. Allow yourself to feel the grief, the anger, the sadness that maybe got pushed down for years just to survive.
So not just understanding what happened, but really letting yourself feel the impact.
Precisely. And starting to challenge those negative core beliefs. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. My needs don't matter. Beliefs that got cemented in childhood.
That sounds like hard work.
It is. And self-compassion is absolutely vital here. Learning to treat yourself with the kindness and understanding that maybe wasn't there back then. It also involves consciously trying to choose adult responses in triggering situations rather than defaulting to those old reactive childhood patterns. It takes practice, a lot of practice.
I've heard the term reparenting the inner child used in this context. What does that actually mean practically?
Reparenting essentially means consciously giving yourself now what you needed and didn't get back then. It's about becoming that consistent, validating, compassionate presence for that younger part of yourself.
How does one do that?
It can look like different things. Maybe it's journaling from the perspective of your younger self. Maybe it's visualization where you imagine comforting that child. It could be consciously offering yourself reassurance when you feel anxious or validating your own feelings. It's okay to feel sad right now. You're essentially providing the missing emotional experiences.
So it's an active process of nurturing yourself in the ways you needed back then. A real commitment to your own emotional well-being.
It really is. And just recognizing this potential emotional age, understanding why you might react certain ways, why certain things feel so difficult, that awareness itself is incredibly powerful. It's often a massive, liberating first step towards healing and feeling more whole.
So if we were to boil down the key takeaway from our deep dive today, it's really about seeing this potential difference between intellectual maturity and emotional maturity in adult children of narcissistic parents, and understanding that it often links back to unmet needs from that crucial, maybe 5 to 7-year-old developmental window.
Exactly that. Understanding that dynamic isn't about blame, it's about insight. And that insight can be incredibly empowering on the path to healing, self-awareness, and building a life that feels more authentic and emotionally congruent.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. It's given us a lot to think about. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it offered some valuable perspectives.
My pleasure. It's important stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. Please join us again next week as we explore another fascinating topic.